Hello, this is Psychic 101, Class 1 with Rev Don Lewis at Psychic Academy. Welcome, everyone. And tonight we're going to talk about what we mean by some of the terms that we're using and what we're going to be looking at in this course. And I was thinking, as I was preparing for the class, if you're as old as I am, you will remember back in the early 1970s, there was a television program called The Sixth Sense that had as its primary character a psychic. And it was almost realistic. It was as realistic as anything that's been done on this subject in mainstream television. But the thing that made me think of this is that phrase, the sixth sense. We don't hear that phrase very much anymore, but back in those days, it was a very common phrase. Again, if you're as old as I am, you'll remember that working with psychic matters, all kinds of metaphysics were very mainstream at that time. And people talked a lot about the sixth sense. When we talk about Psychic 101, when we talk about what we mean by psychism, what we mean by psychic energy, I don't think this is a bad place to start. Now, granted, we know that the idea of the five senses is a bit outdated at this point. But when we speak of the five senses, we're speaking about the ability to see, the ability to hear, the ability to smell, the ability to taste, the ability to feel physically. The sixth sense is the ability to feel energy around us and to pick things up from that energy. When we talk about psychism, when we talk about working with psychic energy, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about working with the interconnected relationships that exist energetically between everything that exists and picking up on it in a way that we get information from it. And I like that term, the sixth sense, even though I have no particular desire to see it become current again. But it does begin by pointing out it's something everyone has. I spent many years working in psychic fair circuits, and I know some people, or knew some people who were quite offended by the idea that anyone could become a psychic. They thought it was a special gift that only some people have. I am vehemently opposed to that point of view. I will grant you some people have a greater preponderance for it naturally, but anyone can develop it, just like any of those other senses, unless for some reason it's impaired. It's a natural rather than a supernatural thing. Everyone, and if you look at little children, this is very clear. Everyone starts this life being able to feel energy. It's just some of us close it down as we get older, partly because society encourages us to do that. This class, among other things, is about undoing that part of social programming that causes you to shut this down, reopening it, reconnecting to it, and using it the way I believe we're all meant to use it from the moment of our birth. And thinking of it as the sixth sense really makes clear that this is a natural thing that all of us possess. Now, the person that I knew all those years ago who did not like the suggestion that anyone could be a psychic pointed out that, well, anyone can play the piano, but they're not all Mozart. Well, that's true. But still, anyone can learn to play the piano. And not everyone will necessarily develop their psychic abilities to the same level or in the same direction. It is a very individual thing. And like everything else, people have their own preferences, their own talents, I suppose we'd say, that will come into play in how they develop these things. But anyone can develop them. And if we look again at those other sites, some people have a far more developed sense of smell than others. People who work with aromatherapy rely on their smell very heavily, whereas there are other people who barely seem to smell anything. People who are visual artists rely on their sight, generally speaking, much more than many other people. I've often had situations where I was able to point out minute details of a picture um, that other people who did not have an artistic background could only see when it was pointed out to them. And so, yes, everyone can develop their psychic skills to a greater or lesser extent, but everyone can develop them. And how do you do that? Well, it's all around you. Um, we're talking about the relationship that exists between all things that exist. Um, you don't have to be anywhere special to work with psychic energy. When you first begin, there may be certain things that will be more helpful to you, but the truth is, it's a matter of everyday life. And so I think that what I would say as we begin this course is that what we're really doing is rediscovering what we should all have naturally, but don't always. And perhaps taking it then a little farther through training than what we might have naturally. Um, we have in this class a number of different, or in this course, a number of different classes that are going to focus on a number of different aspects of the psychic arts. Our second class is going to focus heavily on psychic hygiene. Our third class is going to focus on how to find and grow our psychic energy. Our fourth class is different kinds of ways that we can work with our psychic energy. And there are so many different kinds of ways we can do that. The fifth class is going to deal in greater proportion with things that might be called, come under the heading of clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. The sixth class is divination, and how, in its way, this is its own specific form of psychic work. Seventh class is psychic healing. Eighth class will return to the subject of psychic hygiene, but at a much deeper level. And in particular, working with things other than yourself. The ninth class is working with spirits, something that many people are very interested in when working with psychic energy, but certainly not the only thing here. The 10th class is working with others in particularly more of a professional sense and more of a social sense. The 11th class is how to maintain and replenish your energy. And the final class is basically a review of everything that we will be going through. So we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of psychic work. When we do psychic work, you know, we can do it with ourselves, we can do it with other people, we can do it with locations. We can do it with people who are here in the physical world, we can do it with people who have passed on into the spiritual world. Again, what we're working with is the relationship that exists through spiritual or psychic energy between everything that is, between people, between geographic places, between temporal places, between humans and animals, humans and plants. Psychic energy touches on all of these things, and so we will be doing that as well. It is not in any sense a small subject. Now, one of the things I have down to talk about today are ways in which we commonly experience our psychic energy, even when we don't know about it, but also famous examples of of psychic situations. And when we go through life, we all experience psychic energy to some extent. Many people talk themselves out of believing that that's what it is, but they still experience it. And they experience it in things like hunches, intuitions, um, unexplained feelings that may turn out to be very important. Um, I think there are very few people who have never had that kind of experience. Again, some people will consider it their imagination and explain it away. I will say it's not your imagination. It is picking up on that psychic energy. Um, and there are some very famous examples. And a lot of times you will hear after any great disaster of the people who only barely escaped it because they had a feeling they should not go to work that day. They had a feeling um, they needed to cancel that trip. They were prevented from going for some reason. And these are really cultural tropes at this point, but they're also true stories. Um, and people definitely do get psychic warnings in life. And it's generally wise to pay attention to these. Now, if we talk about famous examples, probably one of the most famous examples of this um, is probably Julius Caesar and his wife Calpurnia, who dreamed of his assassination, which at least, according to the legend, he ignored and went on to be assassinated. But she had dreamed the event and tried to talk him out of going that day. She knew something bad was going to happen. And initially she convinced him, but his friends kind of taunted him into going otherwise. And who knows how the world would be different if he had listened to her. Another famous example of a psychic experience that occurs to me, and I cannot think of the woman's name, but there was a woman in the 1950s who was touring, I believe it was Holyrood House, where Mary Queen of Scots had lived. And she was able, without ever having been there before or being particularly learned about Mary Queen of Scots, to say things that she was remembering being there. One of them, she pointed to a tapestry and said, "There's a door behind there." And even the tour guide was not aware that, in fact, there was a door, but they were sufficiently game that they moved the tapestry. It was there. This is an example of a past life memory, which is one of the things that we'll be talking about under different kinds of psychic experiences. When we talk about past life memories and things like that, we very commonly see this in children. And they usually forget it by the time they start growing up. But there's some very famous examples, especially out of India, but also out of the United States, of children who were able to identify specific incidents and people from their previous lifetime, even to the point of finding those people. I remember visiting a house here in Illinois that is famous for that. And in that story, the young girl had remembered having lived in this particular house. She remembered having a husband and two sons, and she convinced her parents in her current life to basically go for a drive looking for this house. And they were quite surprised when she pointed and said, "No, that's the house." They went to the house and found that the family who lived there were as she had described them. And she went on to have a relationship for the rest of that life with that older family as well as her new family. And you see this also frequently in situations in in India, where it's a much more commonly researched subject. But it's not uncommon for children to have that kind of memory come through, and it's not uncommon for children to have all kinds of psychic energy come through. One of the things you'll often see online are articles about weird things children have said that kind of show they're more sensitive to energy. And again, partly because they have not reached the point in time that they're encouraged to shut it down. Our society, by and large, does encourage us to shut it down. And I'd like to think if we didn't do that, it would still be there. Now, I was taught that as we grow older, and as we enter puberty in particular, our body also tends to shut it down, that we have to make an effort to keep it open as we move farther into this lifetime. And I think that's something that people doing psychic research really should probably look more at. But it's not the easiest thing to research. But either way, for most people, they must make an effort to reopen that ability. So some of the things we're going to talk about, in addition to what I read through earlier, are also exercises to help to reopen that ability. We want to talk about the things that you can do in your daily life to reopen that ability. And there are a lot of things, and some of them are very obvious, and some of them are not. But one of the most obvious is simply listening to the things you get. One of the things we will talk about as we go forward is how to sit for spiritual messages. But chances are you get them whether you're sitting for them or not. And many people simply dismiss them. If you try to become more aware of your environment, if you listen for those messages you may be getting and pay attention to them, this will help a great deal in starting to reopen that ability. I want to talk a little bit also about why this works. And I should take a moment to say that, of course, I'm speaking from my own background, and I am going to try to point out, wherever possible, that there are different points of view. Earlier, I was talking about how I've known people who don't believe that psychic ability is something everyone has. So be aware it's not a universal opinion, but it is mine that everyone has that, and it's been what I've found in many, many years of working with this. In terms of why this works, you'll also find a variety of opinions in terms of what people will say to this. I'm going to speak out of my own background, and I'm going to start. I'm going to start actually with a couple of words about history. And you cannot look at human history and not see psychism all over it. Psychism, magic, which is the active use of psychism, well before we learned how to write. One of the things I like to talk about is how there is one of the earliest examples of this comes from a cave in France, where prehistoric people had created, I believe it was 7 dwellings inside the cave. And at the door to each of these dwellings, there was a fox skull. The fox skull serves no purpose in any practical sense. It wasn't helping to hold the door open. It wasn't a doorstop. It wasn't a piece of artwork as far as anyone can suggest. It's apparently there as a psychic guardian. Right there at the very beginning of our history, if we look at ancient Egypt and ancient Sumeria, the earliest examples of written history that we have, psychism and the use of psychism in religion and spirituality are all over these. The ability to read psychically is remarked on very early in human history. And so it's been part of our existence. And the result of this, of course, is that many people have had many ideas on why it works. I would refer back to the Corpus Hermeticum, which is the Hermetic writings, and that idea of as above, so below, which to me explains why this works. The idea of as above, so below is the idea that the creator of the universe, however you want to look at the creator of the universe, if you want to think of the creator of the universe as one or several or whatever your word for that power is reflected in everything that is created. Nothing is truly separate. Because nothing is truly separate and everything is connected, there's always a connection between all those things. Therefore, there's a connection between you and everything that exists. If you find the connection, you can find anything you wish to find about the other end of that connection. So to me, we begin by being all connected. When we try to do psychic work, one of the things that we often find ourselves doing is looking for how to strengthen that connection in order to obtain information from it. When I do a reading for a person, I often ask to hold something that belongs to them. Not because I'm getting the energy from what I'm holding, but because it helps to strengthen my connection to their energy and also distracts my conscious mind. So drawing upon that connecting energy, in my mind, is why this works. And it's, again, I would say always there. This is why we get hunches that we're not looking for, but merely come to us. It's why we get feelings that merely come to us, because those connections are there whether we're conscious of them or not. They're there whether we are working with them or not. But when we do work with them, they offer us much more. So if you ask me, why does this work? That ultimately is my response. I would say that all of us are intimately connected to the universe in ways that we're not conscious of. But when we work with psychic abilities, we become conscious of them. Now, when we talk about how to learn this, there are a few things that I should start by saying right off the top, and that the first and most important from my point of view is it's actually really simple to learn how to do this, except that's never obvious until you've done it. When you actually start out to do it, it doesn't seem simple at all. When you get there, very often you'll find yourself looking at it and saying, wow, that's all it was? If I had understood it in the first place, I'll give you an example. When I was learning how to channel, I was told, just fall back into it. It'll happen naturally. It's like falling off a log. It took me months to learn how to do this. I was thinking my way through it. I was fighting at every step of the way, not realizing I was doing that. When I finally did it, it was the simplest thing on earth. It was like falling off a log. But until I experienced it, I could not conceive it. That will be true in the case of many of these psychic arts. Until you've experienced it, it may be hard to conceive. Once you get there, I think in the end you'll agree with me, it's not really hard. It's just hard to get to. Second thing is to learn to use psychic skill well. You have to be completely passive. You can be as active in your assessment of the things you bring through after you've brought them through as you want to be. You can spend hours going over the details. You can second guess yourself to your heart's content, but not while you're bringing things through. When you're bringing things through, you need to be like an unmarked slate. Not the easiest thing in the world, and also not the hardest. it too is one of those things that once you understand how to do it, it's like, well, that's all it was. Much easier than I thought. But while you're learning to do it, people often use the term stilling your mind. You cannot still your mind. Don't even try to still your mind. It's not going to happen, especially if you're an air sign like a Gemini. That's not what you do. What you do is you don't react to what comes in. In fact, if you can get yourself to the point nothing comes in, you're not going to get anything psychically either, because it comes through your mind. But it's very important when doing this kind of work to allow it to give you the information it's going to give you, and not to force that information to take whatever form you might wish it to take. And this is a very important skill, which we'll begin working on in class number 2, and probably will continue working on throughout the lessons. It is vitally important to learn how to do it. But at the same time, if it takes you a while to learn how to do it, don't let that bother you either, because everything does take its time, and there's always plenty of time. And the other thing that I think that I would have to say, as we talk about how to learn to do this, and I have often been asked, how can you tell the difference between your imagination and an actual psychic message? And this is an important point that I don't think we're jumping the gun to look at this early. And the answer is, the first time you do it, you might not be able to. What you have to do is keep working with it and pay attention to your results. And you will learn to tell the difference. There is a different feeling. But when you first begin, you may not recognize that feeling. So you have to give it some time. You have to pay attention to your results, and you have to pay attention to what you're feeling. But it won't take very long to tell that special feeling that you get. And I can't describe it to you because it may be different for you than it is for me. And I think maybe that's the last really important thing for me to say in terms of how you learn this. And that is you have to be aware that some things may be different for you than for other people. One of the things I do is I work with the chakras, which are the energy centers of the body. Each chakra has many different levels within it. And different people develop different levels to different extents. When they go to work with their chakras, they will sometimes find that they feel them in different locations than another person might, because they focus on a different level than many other people do. This is true of everything in the psychic world. You're learning to work with your own system, your own relationship to everything that exists, and it won't necessarily be exactly the same as everyone else. Most things are going to be, and for most people, this is probably not going to be an issue. But if you do find certain things manifest for you differently, you want to pay attention to that. That is an important consideration in how to work with this. Now, meditation is very important in doing psychic work. And I'll give you an example regarding meditation. When I was learning meditation, people either did it in silence, or they had these very specific meditation tapes that were basically soft jazz or things like that, or kind of nondescript toning. My late wife came to this from a totally different background. She meditated to heavy metal music. It worked perfectly well for her. Soft jazz did not. And what she did when she did that is she followed the percussion beats in the music, just as if you were listening to tribal drumming. Same basic principle. Another thing people often use for meditation, music. But, I know people who at that time thought this was just preposterous, that they had value judgments regarding different kinds of music. They thought of classical music as good, hard rock music is bad. And the actual qualities of the music and how it could or could not be used for meditation, for some of those people, could not overcome their prejudices. And you want to be careful of your prejudices in working with learning psychic ability, because they can hold you back. They can hold you back from things which may be unfamiliar to you, or perhaps you've heard things about that were not necessarily true. My advice is to always keep an open mind. Certainly always work within your comfort level, but keep an open mind with what you're doing. And again, remember that what works well for one person may not work so well for another. I'll give you another example of this. I've often been asked in my life if I just see spirits standing around rooms all the time. And the answer is no, I do not. Why do I not? Because I choose not to. I would find that terribly discomforting. For me to receive that kind of psychic information, I have to turn it on and then I turn it off. They can push through that, but they rarely do. And they acknowledge my privacy, because I don't want spirits to just walk into the room while I'm busy doing whatever. When I'm ready to talk to them, I will sit for them and we will all talk. I know other people who do like to be open all the time. It's how they pursue their practice. Nothing wrong with it, but it would be very, as I say, very discomforting to me to do that. And I think also for me, I would find it very distracting when I'm doing spiritual work. I'm doing it usually in a focused manner, not just sitting around looking for whatever I can find. And so these are things that illustrate why this can be very different for different people. I'll give you one more, and you'll notice I'm wearing a gold ring this evening. Actually, I'm wearing 3 gold rings this evening. Mostly because I'm wearing a gold tie pack, but that's beside the point. I know a lot of people in the psychic world don't like gold. They like silver, to the point they won't wear gold. Nothing wrong with that. That's right for them. It is not right for me. I wear all kinds of different metals, and I find no negative effect from this. But I do understand that for some other people, it can be different. I would never presume to tell them they're wrong. I might tell them, you might want to look at this again without preconception and see if you still find it to be true. Because I think in some cases, this choice has been exactly that, a choice. But I do not assume that just because someone is doing something differently than I do it, that they must be wrong. That has not been my experience in life. And I think it's a very blinkered way to go through life, making that assumption. I also never just assume that I'm wrong because someone disagrees with me, but I'm always willing to look at it. And there have been times I found that, there were things that I did need to reconsider, things that I did need to change. And my message in looking at all these things that we're going to look at is that none of this is written in stone. All of this is based on people's experiences, and it will help with your experiences. But again, if you have a different feeling about something, I would never say you should not listen to that. It might be right just for you, or you might be onto something that everybody else will be talking about 10 years from now. And so as we go into working with the psychic arts, again, I want to emphasize it's an individual process. We'll be approaching it in a generalized way, but how you approach it really is ultimately unique to you. And I want to take a moment now and focuses on our first exercise dealing with these classes. And there are going to be a couple of different exercises that we're going to look at. And then we'll close up for the evening and move on to questions. The first thing I want you to do to prepare yourself for the exercise is just find yourself a nice, comfortable position. It doesn't have to be anything specific, but it is nice if you have your feet flat on the floor, perhaps your hands flat on the arms of your chair, on your lap, wherever you would like to have them. And just take a moment to let any tension or any anxiety you might be carrying run out of you. And imagine it as if it were water pouring down through your body, pouring out through your hands and your feet, and returning to the universe to be reused in other and different ways. And feel it all run out through your hands and your feet so that you are refreshed and ready to move forward. This is a very simple exercise, but it may be the most important one I'm going to teach you. And it's one that I teach all of my students, usually right at the very beginning. Having done that, I'm going to ask you to join me in taking 3 deep breaths. And as we breathe in, we're going to breathe in the love of spirit. And as we breathe out, we're going to breathe out everything that limits us. Breathe in the love of spirit. Breathe out everything that limits you. Breathe in the love of spirit. Breathe out everything that limits you. Breathe in the love of spirit. Breathe out everything that limits you. And feel yourself relaxed and unlimited. And I want you to become aware of yourself and the things that are around you, but have your eyes closed. And don't think of the physical things around you, but think of what you can feel around you. And do you in fact feel anything? Reach out from your highest self to see what is there around you. The room that you're in, does it feel happy to you? Does it feel sad to you? Does it feel different in different places? Does it feel hectic? Does it feel peaceful? See what's there. Reach out with the tentacles of your mind, for want of a better way to put it, and feel what's there. No matter where you are, there are things there. You may or may not feel them at this time, but you will soon. And if you do feel them at this time, take note of them. And if anything particularly draws you, look at that more deeply. What emotions does it bring you? What information does it bring you? In the end, everything we're going to learn is about doing what we're doing at this moment, reaching out into the universe and feeling what's there. Now, take a moment and center back into yourself. Allow those tentacles of your mind to come back into your mind. And once again, let us take a moment to clear and release all excess energy. Any tension and anxiety we may have picked up from our room, let it flow out of us like water, flowing down through our arms and our legs and out through our hands and our feet, and bringing us back to a normal place in the here and now. And so to um, to bring our class to a close for this evening, dealing with what it is we're talking about when we talk about psychic and psychic energy. What we're talking about is what we've just done, reaching out to feel the connections that already exist between ourselves and everything else that is out there, and drawing information from those things. This is a natural part of life, at least as far as I'm concerned, and every person has this when they're born. They're often encouraged to shut it down, but it's never really gone. And even if you haven't felt it for a long time, it's still there. And as you tell it, you want it to reopen, it's going to. And I want to encourage you to go forward with the class and to reopen these abilities in your life, but also to keep them in their proper place. As I was saying earlier, I work to make sure that when I'm doing psychic work, I'm aware that I'm doing it. And when I'm not, I'm not. And although, again, every person has a different way that may be right for them, when you're learning, I think you'll find this is the best way. So focus on it when you're doing it. You can do it at any time. And between now and the next class, the exercise we've just shared is something I would encourage you to repeat many, many times in many, many different places and see how differently they feel. But when you're done, clear out that energy and be done. And I think you'll find that is the best way to handle it. And so with that, I thank you for listening. And that concludes class number 1 of Psychism 101.